I don't think there is such a thing as a sustainable startup, because I mean, to be sustainable, you need to meet three different criteria. You need to meet this kind of economic viability. Can we sustain our operations in the long run? You need to meet the environmental sustainability. Is what we are doing protecting the environment? And the social aspect, are we contributing to society, to the communities in which we operate, in a way that goes beyond simply ignoring them, which is what many companies do.
Our guest today believes in saving the planet using spreadsheets, sensors, and startups. He's co-founded a mangrove restoration nonprofit, turned sustainability into software stack, and still finds time to teach students how to pitch ideas that might not destroy the future. This isn't your usual academic. Welcome to another episode of School to Startup, brought to you by Tracxn, the private market intelligence platform supporting the global startup ecosystem for over 12 years. Through our university partnerships, we collaborate with institutions driving innovation and entrepreneurship, and this series highlights the academic leaders making that happen. I'm Harish, your host today, and joining us is Dr. Simon, Assistant Professor of Strategy and Entrepreneurship at Singapore Management University, and someone who's probably said blockchain and biodiversity in the same sentence, unironically. Dr. Simon, welcome to the show.
Hi, Harish. It's great to be here. Looking forward to our conversation.
Great. So we are going to kick things off with a mildly dangerous question. You have done research on when expert teams actually fail to innovate. So if you had to start a company with a committee of professors, then who is in charge of operations and who gets gently redirected away from the whiteboard?
I don't think I would start a company with a committee of professors. I think professors are good at some things, but I don't think most academics, especially people in business schools, are actually very well suited for starting a business or running a business, or maybe even being involved in a business. The set of skills you need as an entrepreneur or as a founder, and I think even just working in a large company, are quite different from those that you need as an academic. So there's a reason why very few academics kind of move into entrepreneurship, especially academics in business schools, which of course I'm most familiar with. And yeah, I don't think most of us have the skills to do it. And I'm not sure that I have after 7 years of trying to build startups as well. It always proves to be very, very difficult to turn them into a success.
Right, we'll discuss that in detail. Let's zoom out a bit. You have owned a lot of hats, researcher, founder, advisor, teacher. But where did this all begin? Was there a moment where the strategy, startups, and sustainability all kicked into one place?
So I don't know if it all kind of comes down to one place. My interest really in sustainability, and back then it was called corporate social responsibility and business ethics, really started when I was in my first degree at university. And I ended up writing my dissertation on Buddhism and economics, looking at the question, like, how would capitalism be organized if the goal was not profit maximization, but the alleviation of all suffering for all species on Earth? And so the Buddhist credo. And that kind of led me down a rabbit hole that probably brought me to where I am now. So the origin really is my fourth year of university, where I started working on my dissertation. And then it moved from doing that dissertation, then a specialization degree in corporate social responsibility. Then after a 1-year gap year where I was traveling, I went into consulting on the intersection of sustainability and innovation. Then did my PhD, again on that same intersection. And then eventually moved to Singapore to become a professor here, and got some grants to be able to study innovation in the natural world, that then indirectly led to the founding of initially Global Mangrove Trust, and then a year and a half later, Handprint.
Right. Very interesting. You're involved in everything from carbon markets to regeneration tech. What are some of the projects that currently have you most excited or slightly obsessed?
So inside my own company, Handprint, I think the most exciting part right now is that we are advancing a new build. So we're developing a new suite of solutions that we believe can address a very critical challenge in the impact space, which is how do we guarantee, or at least increase the credibility, that units of impact, whether it's 1 hour of education, 1 person fed for a day, 1 tree planted, 1 coral restored, very diverse. But how do we guarantee that these units of impact are not double sold and uniquely attributed to a single sponsor? And this is a very big challenge. This is why for carbon credits, you have centralized registries that are doing this to make sure that there is no double selling and double claiming. But in the broader impact space, this problem really hasn't been solved. And so we are starting a build that we believe is going to not entirely solve this because it's unsolvable, but at least significantly increase the credibility and the reliability of claims that can be made. So I think this is very exciting, what we're seeing internally. The second thing I think that is interesting within Global Mangrove Trust, my non-profit, is we're seeing some potential evolution towards new certification standards, specifically in order to meet the requirements of particular off-takers. I can't give too much detail about this. So that could be a pretty interesting next step, because if we can meet those new kind of requirements, we will be able to sell our carbon credits into a very large organization that could probably buy everything that is produced within our projects, which would be good for our financial viability, but also for our scalability to go from where we are now, managing about 5,000 hectares, to maybe 10 or 20,000. So that's what I'm excited about. And then I think maybe in the broader market on the impact space, we're seeing a turn towards the ocean, right? So for a very long time, I think impact has been, at the corporate level, what our company's interested in, really focused on, they care about carbon, maybe they care a little bit about something else, but now biodiversity is coming. But I think the ocean as a space within which impact can be generated, that has a lot of implications for biodiversity, for carbon, for human well-being, for economic livelihoods, seems to be emerging. And that's something that could be really interesting, because I think it's very important, but it's also could be very good for our business.
Interesting. We'll go deep dive into it. Before that, a quick pause. This is for all our viewers. If you're enjoying this conversation, hit that like button, drop a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe to Tracxn channel. We've got more episodes like this, straight from the intersection of startups, academia, and the real world impact. Dr. Simon, you've touched on something there, right? Systems thinking. You've described digital sustainability as more than tech with a green label. Can you break that down for students and even the early stage founders? What are they often missing when they say we are sustainable startup?
I don't know how many founders say that they are working in a sustainable startup. There might be, but then they're very optimistic. I don't think there is such a thing as a sustainable startup, right? Because I mean, to be sustainable, you need to really meet 3 different criteria. Right? If kind of thinking about the triple bottom line, or even if we think about ESG now. So, but you need to meet this kind of economic viability. Can we sustain our operations in the long run? Right? You need to meet the environmental sustainability. Is what we are doing protecting the environment, or at least not harming it? And the social aspect, are we contributing to society, to the communities in which we operate, in a way that goes beyond simply either ignoring them, which is what many companies do, or just potentially paying some salaries into them? There is not a single company on earth, I think, that meets these 3 criteria right now, especially on the no harm to the environment. Companies have not even started on this. What companies have started to do under the influence of regulation and really pressure from stock exchanges, talking about large companies here, is they've started to measure, often poorly, how bad they are for the world, and they started to report on this, and they've started to put some investments and strategies in place that reduce this negative impact. And this is really the most we can see in 99.9% of companies that are allegedly doing a lot in the sustainability or the ESG space. Their focus is really on, are we less bad for the world than we were last year? But not, are we good for the world? Like, this is really a question that most companies are objectively, they're not even trying to answer, because the answer would be no. And so, yeah, I think as a startup, it's very hard to think about these 3 things at the same time. You got to figure out, like, where is your product market fit? What are companies willing to pay for? And then can you deliver that product or that service in such a way that it indeed creates economic viability, environmental protection, or even contribution and restoration, as well as kind of social embeddedness with society and with communities. And yeah, it's an incredibly hard thing to do. And even for a company like Handprint, which is 100% focused on creating positive impact, that is literally the product that we sell, even we would probably need to think about, okay, what is the opportunity cost of our investors giving money to us, or of a client giving money to us? Or, yes, there is a great event in London, but does it make sense for one of us to fly there and then having all of this kind of carbon footprint associated with that? So really being sustainable, it's still a pipe dream, unfortunately.
Interesting. And while we are on the topic of doing hard things, you co-founded the Global Mangrove Trust, which involves blockchain, remote ecosystems, and fieldwork that probably includes a lot of mud. So tell us, what's tougher, launching an impact startup or convincing university to support mangrove-based innovation?
I mean, the university has been very supportive in my entrepreneurial endeavors, mainly by allowing me to do it, and by seeing that there are synergies between what I'm doing as an entrepreneur and what I'm teaching in class and what I'm doing in terms of research. I think the difference between starting a for-profit company and a non-profit company is kind of emerging more over time. I think the focus is quite different. A non-profit, where I'm a non-executive director, so I'm really not involved in the day-to-day operations, is financially sustainable. And we have right now the partnerships and the grants and the projects to be a financially sustainable company, or an organization, but the goal is not scaling. Right? And so there is a difference, if we're thinking about this from like entrepreneurship, there is a difference between an organization that is set up with as a goal to scale. And so my for-profit, which has venture capital funding, has to scale, otherwise it's going bankrupt, versus another type of organization like a non-profit, or it can be a for-profit, but if the goal is not scaling, it's not the same type of entrepreneurship. It works in a very different way. You have less pressure, you have more freedom, and especially once you take money from investors, your freedom is constrained. You have a lot fewer stakeholders that you have to deal with. Like Handprint has like two big investors. Then we have an SPV, a special purpose vehicle that we set up that has 43 individual business angels aggregated. We have a lot of stakeholders that we need to consider, big clients in different countries. So it works, it's much more complex, whereas the NGO basically has one financial backer and a few grant givers. The organizational complexity is much reduced. And I think the benefit of not having to scale and being able to create an organization where you say, okay, we have 5 people in 3 countries, we can run our operations, and if a real opportunity comes around that would require us to do either a lot more work or potentially hire somebody extra, we can do it, but we don't have to. And so I think these things are very different in my experience. That's because we build an NGO that doesn't necessarily wants to become the new WWF or the new Greenpeace. And because we built a company and got venture backing, and as a consequence, need to become a unicorn or a phoenix, as we say, and in order to be able to be viable in the long run.
Interesting. I think that answers my another question on entrepreneurship for students to hear. But then there are those moments where something just works, right? Have you seen any student-led project that genuinely surprised you, the kind that made you think, okay, they might actually pull this off?
In terms of student-led projects, I'm not sure if I've seen many within SMU, right, that have come out of university directly and started on this entrepreneurial journey. There's a few that have tried this, and I haven't seen great success stories myself. What I have seen in one of the courses that I'm teaching, which is called the Design of Business, it's a capstone course for last year business school students, in which we work in teams with different clients. It could be companies like L'Oreal, very big companies, or small startups. And we're trying to solve with student teams real business problems. And what I've seen there is that there are, especially when students work with smaller startups, their ideas can actually get implemented. So we do see that, and that's a very strong sign of success. But yeah, I've been involved with one of our accelerators and our kind of incubator program. And there, of course, we see people, we see students as well that have their own business idea, that are working on this as entrepreneurs. But so far, I haven't seen one that really kind of grew out of this and that has become the poster child of like, oh, this is the success of the incubator or the accelerator. Hopefully this year is going to be the year that it happens to a few of us. I definitely hope it will happen to us because we are still not there either.
Right, hopefully. So talking about those capstone projects and students, right, who are eager, optimistic, might be slightly confused, what mindset shift would you want them to walk out with?
What mindset shift? I mean, I think in today's world where, I mean, education has been or is undergoing a radical transformation because of generative AI. And I think the way we will organize society and the way we'll organize work is also going to transform. So what I would encourage students to think about now, and that I want them to come, maybe not come to me with this mindset, but by the time they leave my classes, I want them to have a mindset that recognizes that careers in the future are going to be much more flexible. I think the old concept of you start in one organization, you can stay there forever, might still be true for very, very few people, but for most of us, it's not going to be true. I think that organizations are going to become smaller, and that there is going to be a lot more need for entrepreneurs. And so in a world where a lot of the simple jobs, the simple knowledge work, if you think about like firms in like accounting or consulting or law or media, like many of these kind of areas where students from business schools that I teach in, where they end up in, the lowest tier, just the kind of the starter tier, is going to be incredibly thin in the future. It's going to be much harder for students to get job opportunities in these types of organizations, because most of the work that normally would be done by like a junior analyst is now done very quickly by AI. And we see this already in the US. It's happening slower in Europe. I'm not sure what the situation here is in China and so, or in India, but I do think this is a very big transition that we are experiencing, and it's only going to accelerate in the next 2 years, 2 and 3 years. And so then the big question for students becomes like, if the entry-level jobs are fewer and further between, what is the career track that gets me into a place where I want to be, either as an entrepreneur or potentially at some point as an employee working? And I think for many more students, the initial phase of the career track is going to have to be much more entrepreneurial. And so having that realization, developing that mindset of, I'm going to figure out where a problem is that I can solve and start doing it, is probably the most important thing for students right now at university.
Very interesting. And finally, we ask every guest on this question, what's one belief that you used to hold about innovation, impact, or startups that you have now let go of?
That is a good question. What belief that I used to hold that I've let go of? Well, I don't know if I ever held the belief, but let's say it's something I didn't know. So when we started Handprint, we were at the very beginning of COVID. So we started in December 2019. And so from the very start, as a consequence, we were a fully digital, fully remote organization, which we still are 6 years later. What we didn't do, or we didn't do enough as an early stage startup, is talking to people and figuring out what is really the problem that you have that we might be able to solve. We had a very strong idea, Ryan and I, that we already knew what the problem was, because we did this commissioned piece of research for the United Nations, from which 2 big problems had emerged. And our assumption was, because these are massive problems that are really important to the world, companies are going to want to solve them. And we were wrong. I really think we were wrong about this. Like, it's not because there is a massive problem that any company or any specific type of company, an ICP, like an ideal customer persona, that they want to solve this problem. Some problems are there because nobody wants to solve them. And many of the problems that I care about, like climate change and biodiversity collapse and the toxification and the acidification of the ocean, like these are very big problems for human survival, but unfortunately, they are not problems that companies really want to solve. And so the mistake that we made was that we started building products and solutions for the problem that we thought companies wanted to solve. And we started doing this too early. And I think this is really the main lesson that I've learned, is that if I ever would start another company, I wouldn't start building anything until we have 5 or 10 signed letters of intent, if it's a B2B, or 500 or 1,000 individual customers that say, hey, if you're building this and it looks indeed like this and this and this, and it can do all of these things, we're going to pay $5 or $10 per month for this. Before you have that, and you've really shown that there is a market for this, there are people, there are companies that are willing to pay for this, don't build anything. And when I say build, I really mean hardcore code development or hardcore product development. Of course, you need to build prototypes. And now with generative AI, we can do this very quickly because you need to show what you're going to do. But that would be the main lesson that I've learned. It's really like delay your conviction that whatever problem you've identified that drove you to start a company is the right problem to solve until you have hard evidence that works in a capitalist world. Contracts with financial returns. Otherwise, you risk building something that's very, very nice and nobody wants. And that's what happens with lots of innovation. Right? 96% of innovations that make it to market fail. That doesn't even account for all of the innovations that never make it to market. So it's a very low probability game.
Very true and interesting. So before we wrap, where can people follow your work, learn more about your ventures, or even send you memes about regenerative capitalism?
Sending me memes. I mean, I'm most active on LinkedIn. So my LinkedIn profile is probably the best place to follow me. I also have my own website, simonschillebeeckx.com. Nobody can pronounce that last name, so don't worry about it. I'm almost never active on Twitter or other things like this. I have an Instagram, but it's just for friends. So LinkedIn would really be the best place. And then, of course, globalmangrove.org and handprint.tech, the websites of my companies. That's other places where you can see what we're doing. And soon, probably also a little bit more on YouTube again.
Great. All the links will be available in the comment section. You can just click on it and reach out to Dr. Simon.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Dr. Simon. From startup studios to swampy fieldwork, this conversation showed us how regeneration and innovation don't just coexist, they can actually fuel each other. Thank you again for being part of this episode.